that Pacific Crest Trail has about 500,000 feet of climbing. Imagine climbing up 500,000 feet. Everest is 30,000 feet, more or less from sea level. It's kind of like climbing Everest from sea level, I'd say about 18 times.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we talk to athletes, adventurers, and business owners from around the world of adventure sports. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest, starting a bike shop, or getting up off your couch to take your kids hiking for the first time, we want you to have the motivation and inspiration you need to chase that next adventure. The Adventure Sports Podcast is brought to you by Camp Crate, the leaders in fully planned self-guided backpacking adventures, as well as backpacking gear rental. You can check them out at campcrate.net. So, on Monday we talked to Susan Conrad about the Inside Passage and how much of a life-changing experience that was. Today we're talking to, this one goes way back, not way back, it goes back about 2 years, and it's a couple who were just dating at the time. Now they're married. They did a triathlon that spanned a few continents, and one of the aspects of the triathlon was doing the Inside Passage. The other one was biking the length of North and South America, which, talk about couple goals. Jeez. But this is a great adventure story, and Yannick is telling the story. He's being interviewed by Kurt, and this is part one. We're going to do part two on next Thursday, but this is just once in a lifetime type of stuff that this couple got to experience, and I hope you enjoy. It's going to be fun to listen to. Today, the episode is brought to us by Athletic Brewing, makers of non-alcoholic craft beer. Great stuff. Really encourage you to try it. CS Instant Coffee is also a sponsor. They make 100% Arabica coffee in these little single-serve packets so you can take them with you anywhere you go, as well as the Nomadik. It's a subscription box filled with outdoor gear chosen by outdoor enthusiasts. We're giving away 3 of those for free. Apply in the show notes. And don't forget, apply for our adventure grant. We're giving away $1,000 on June 15th. Applications are still open to June 1st. All right, thank you so much for letting me talk about our sponsors. They help pay for this show. Let's get into this.
Hello and welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is your host, Kurt Linville. Boy, do I have a fun journey to share with you today. I have Yannick Chaigneau with us, and Yannick and Shirley, it's been a few years back, but they did what they like to label the Transcontinental Triathlon. And let me give you just a little bit of the details of that. They kayaked the Inside Passage from Alaska all the way down to Washington. Then they thru-hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, 2,700 miles, and then they got on bikes, and they cycled through Central and South America all the way down to Ushuaia, where they had covered the length of the North and South and Central American continents, which is really, really cool. And also, during that last leg of all the cycling, they stopped off in Peru and Bolivia and did some high-altitude mountaineering just so they wouldn't get too bored. So, wow, we've got a lot to talk about today. This is really going to be fun. Yannick, welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Kurt.
So, Yannick, I have to ask, just the first question is, why did you do it?
Why? Because it was a chance of a lifetime. How many opportunities do you have in your life to do something really big? At the time, I did not have a kid. I actually did not have a wife because Shirley was my girlfriend. And, we thought it's now or never. We were doing okay, no responsibilities as far as, owning a home or things like that. So, no ties. So I thought that was the right time to do something big.
Well, it does sound timely. It was back in 2010, so 7 years ago. I'm sure a lot has changed since then.
Absolutely, yes. We are now proud parents of a 2.5-year-old boy, and It's definitely changing the game here as far as risk and type of adventures we can do with them.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to drill a little bit deeper there. You said that it was timely to do it, and I agree, but a lot of people might have a timely time in their lives, but they still don't try to travel. How many miles was this total? About 15,000 miles?
That was a little more than that, but yeah, I haven't timed everything and calculated everything, but we close to 15,000. That's right.
So what was it that gave you guys the inspiration to take on this feat? I mean, just kayaking the Inside Passage alone is huge.
There were a few drivers, and I'm sure when somebody hears our story or stories of people who've done really lengthy trips, there are many, many factors. First of all, people ask you, how can you afford it? Or we heard that a lot. I would love to do what you did. It's just, not the right time. I can't because I have a mortgage. I can't because I have a job. I can't because I have, a family. So there's always excuses, and myself included, I had excuses. I think the whole thing started with one of my really good friends who had taken, let's call that quote unquote, a sabbatical, and I traveled around the world basically and spent extensive amount of time through, third world countries and exploring all kinds of things. And he came back after a year, he was out of money, and he found a job pretty quickly right after this. And then he repeated that 2 years later. He went back again for over a year and a half until he ran out of money. And I had a conversation with him, and of course, I felt very envious of what he did. And I did the math in my head, and I was thinking, with 2-3 weeks vacation per year, it would take me 50 years to see and do all the things you did in those 2 years. And I told him I'm really jealous. And then he paused and he said, why? You can do it. As a matter of fact, anybody can do it. All you got to do is have the guts to quit your job and go. And then I had a light bulb in my head that said, he's right. I mean, what stops me? I'm just scared. So I thought about it, and I did just that. The hardest part of the whole trip, to be honest, was living my job, because that was a fairly decent job that I enjoyed. So the rest was piece of cake, I'd say, in comparison.
So was Shirley on board from the beginning, or did you have to convince her of the idea?
Oh, no. We were adventure partners, for many years before that. And, every trip was getting harder and more difficult and more challenging than the previous. So we were hitching to get on the road. For us, weekends were not long enough. We get to a point where just being weekend warriors, going on, bag a peak or do some long adventure over, a 72-hour period or 48-hour period was just not enough. We needed more. We had the drive. Motivation was there 100%, and we just had to eliminate what was holding us back, which was jobs. My wife at the time was doing her PhD, and we timed the start of our trip, just for her to get her PhD. And unfortunately, it did not work that way, but but she's glad she went on the trip anyway.
Okay. Well, I have to go back to the job thing a little bit more. I think a lot of people, they say, yeah, I could quit doing what I'm doing, and when I get back, I could probably get another job doing something similar, Mm-hmm. But some people are going to say, I can't quit my job. That would be quitting my career.
Right. So I guess you got to follow your passion, right? If your passion is a career and getting rich and making a lot of money, have at it. That's not the type of person I am. I don't count life in terms of years and money. I count it in terms of adventures and experiences. So with that said, going on the adventure was the right thing. You always regret the things you have not done, but you rarely regret what you've tried and, failed doing.
I think that's a beautiful answer. And I have to agree, it's so easy to get trapped with a comfortable income and want to see it grow. And it creates that fear, that anxiety that if I try to do something else, I might lose this path that I'm on,
Right. And trust me, a lot of people try to steer us away from that idea. My parents were really actually scared and anxious of me kind of ruining all that investment that I'd made in education and, growing my career at the time. But I thought I was at a right spot in my life. I was just about, 30, 31 years old. So 10 years of experience, work experience behind me at the degree. I felt pretty confident that, I would be able to get another job after I came back. So, and as I said, the experience is, is invaluable. Not the job experience, but having done, having achieved your dream is kind of something you can't pass on if you have the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that a lot of people like to throw up objections. It's like, well, I'd love to, but. And
right.
One of the biggest objections is what you just talked about. It's like, well, am I going to be sacrificing my career? Will I be able to get another job when I get back? And what you're saying is just go do it because the memories are going to be worth more than anything else.
Absolutely. Now, I'm in a different situation now. I have a home, I have a child, I have a wife, mortgage, all those things are in my life. I'm just basically like I would say most people in this country, but I still have dreams of other adventures I'd like to do, and I think I'll act on it at some point in the future.
Yeah, really, really cool. Well, let's dive into some of the details about this adventure. Once again, Phase 1 was kayaking the Inside Passage. Phase 2 was a through hike of the Pacific Crest Trail, and Phase 3 was cycling through Central and South America. I mean, this is mind-blowing. The experience that you had must have just been outstanding. I mean, there's no word that could describe all the experiences that you would encounter, on something like this.
Right. So a lot of things was planned with several weeks and months of thinking. But so once I made the decision that I'm going to leave my job and go on a big adventure, I still had no idea what adventure it would be. So we started dreaming big and putting down the type of activities and trips we'd like to do, if we never had to work again and if income was unlimited, for example, or money was unlimited. So we put down things like, climbing Mount Everest, doing a safari in Africa, hiking to the South Pole, cycling around the world, like a ton of activities that are big, committing, that you can only do if you're not working, right? And after doing the math, it turned out that there was about 40, 50 years worth of activities if I were to do them back to back. So better start now, right? So the initial big dream that we had, which we had to trim down a little bit, was to go from North Pole to South Pole on human power. That was a big dream, right? Probably very difficult to achieve with our experience at the time. So we looked into it and actually had the opportunity to talk to some of the polar explorers that went to the poles and discuss, logistic and finance and all that. So we decided that, okay, that might be a little too expensive for our budgets. We don't really want to spend the time to acquire sponsors and all this. So why don't we trim the extremities? We're going to try to do something a little shorter, maybe from the Arctic Circle to, the Antarctic Circle. And that's how the trip came about. What can we do with limited budgets? And I'm happy actually to report that trip was pretty cheap. If people are interested, we only spent about $12,000 for about 2 years for two people to make all this happen.
Wow, $12,000 is a fair chunk of change, but when you realize that that's 2 years of
right,
living.
So per person, if you break it down, we're talking about $3,000 per year per person.
Right.
So it's. I'm not saying everybody can do it, but we also went really cheap. A lot of camping in our schedule. Our budget, because we recorded everything, all the details. Our lodging budget over 2 years was $300 for the two of us. That's how much we spent to put a roof over our head and a shower. And a lot of camping for sure. I'd say about 95% of our time was spent under a tent at night. But we also got invited quite a bit, just meeting strangers along the way. And they offered us a shower. They offered us a roof for the night, or, we shared dinners together. That was great.
Neat. It just kind of illustrates that when you commit to doing something and you start out, a lot of things that would be kind of scary question marks or barriers to the adventure work themselves out as you go along, like all the people that wanted to be a part of it by sharing their homes with you.
Right, absolutely. I mean, one of the big things I discovered along the way, which I'm absolutely convinced about, is there's always a solution to every problem. It doesn't matter what problem you get yourself into, how bad it seems at the time, you're always going to get out of it. It's people are there, and people help quite a bit along the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about phase one, kayaking the Inside Passage. Did you start in Anchorage? Is that right?
No, we started in Juneau, Alaska.
Juneau. Okay, started in Juneau, sea kayaked. And where did you pull out?
We finished our trip in Seattle, Washington. We actually had one of my friend's siblings who lived there, so that was a good place to rest and transition for our next leg of the trip.
Cool. So what was it like to sea kayak that distance? And that Inside Passage is not all completely sheltered from the Pacific either, is it?
That is correct. And those sections scared us quite a bit. So, when you plan all this, you work with maps and, you trace a dotted line on the map. And then when you fly to Alaska, you look over the window, at the ocean, and you realize it's not as blue as the map. I see a lot of white caps and waves crashing on the shore. And it's dawned on us that what are we thinking? What are we getting ourselves into? Are we going to be able to survive this? The interesting thing, too, is I couldn't call myself a kayaker at the time. We had the idea. We thought that was really nice. And our only kayaking experience really was, a week-long trip somewhere in Alaska just for, a week-long trip. And we just thought that was awesome. And then we decided to make it bigger. So we bought a boat. We trained a little bit doing some longer and longer distances. And then that was it, the big trip started.
So you had one tandem kayak then?
That's correct. Yeah, we thought that'd be probably smarter because it's so easy to drift apart when you have two different boats. And if you're in a bad weather and you're only about 100 feet apart, it might be really hard to communicate. Plus the problem of capsizing, being separate. A single boat with heavier weights is more stable. And, if we capsize, which we didn't do, fortunately, one person could stabilize the craft while the other one gets back in. And we can help each other this way.
That's some thinking there. So tell us a little bit about the boat, some details.
Well, very nice boat, I'd say. We didn't go for the cheap one from Walmart. We went with, did a lot of research and got a boat from a company that's shutting down, unfortunately. It's a Canadian boat called Feathercraft. Really nice boat. And the particularity of it is they're skin on frame. So those boats fold in the size of a suitcase. So they're easy to fly somewhere. When you get to your departure point, you assemble it. So the outside is basically rubber for the bottom and cordura for the top. And the frame on the inside that keeps it rigid is plastic and aluminum.
So with that kind of fabric over frame design, did that create any more drag or slow the boat down, or do you think it's pretty comparable?
I think it might be a little bit slower. Now, the benefit of a tandem is you get two engines propelling the boat, right? So it goes faster than a single kayak. There's a little bit disadvantage with drag. But it's, safety, goes up because with the skin on frame type boats, the energy from the ocean, especially when you're in a bad weather situation, that energy gets absorbed by flexing the fabric.
Right.
So it's great. It makes the boat very stable in rough weather. And at times we're really glad, we had this type of boat and not a rigid type craft.
Huh. So is it as comfortable? If with a skin-on frame, for instance, I would be worried about putting my feet in the wrong place and chafing the fabric or something. Is that an issue?
Not from stepping inside the boat. That's strong enough. Now, like with every boat, right, you got to make sure you don't hit the bottom, that you don't scrape it on a reef or on seashells, because that could definitely cause problems. There's nothing duct tape can't fix, right?
Right.
Athletic Brewing is pioneering non-alcoholic craft beer. Yeah, I said non-alcoholic craft beer. And there's a number of reasons you might want to do that. Whether you're training for an event, which a lot of our listeners are, or, if you're babysitting and don't want to be drunk in case something happens. I mean, stuff happens, but you still want to sit down and enjoy the game and have a beer. This is an incredible option for a full-flavored, full-bodied beer. Each can is only 50 to 70 calories. With IPA, golden ales, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings, Athletic Brewing is a great option if you want that craft brewery taste, but not deal with the effects of alcohol itself. If you'd like to save 15% on your first order, go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout. In order to perform your best as an adventure athlete, you need to have a good night's sleep. And Bear mattresses are scientifically proven with a technology called Celliant to help improve sleep quality and boost athletic performance. They have over 5,000 five-star reviews and have been named the best mattress for athletes by Sports Illustrated. They're made in the USA, and there's free shipping right to your front door. They even let you test it out for 100 nights, and if you don't absolutely love it, you get 100% of your money back. So sleep better, perform better, and try the Bear difference. Go to bearmattress.com/adventure. That is BEAR mattress.com/adventure and get 20% off from now until Memorial Day. So don't wait. Hurry and get a Bear mattress and perform your best now, because the sale is from May 17th through May 28th.
So what was it like? Give us a typical day somewhere in the middle of your kayaking part of the journey. What was a typical day like?
Very few vessels around us. Majority of the time, we're just by ourselves, paddling. Long days usually. We wake up by sunrise, can paddle all the way to sunset sometimes. And you really have no idea where you're going to camp the next night. All you know is you're leaving, and you're surrounded by beautiful sceneries. The British Columbian rainforest and Alaskan rainforest are just gorgeous with amazing wildlife. We had whales and killer whales and bears all around us. It was just magical. I mean, and out of the 3 sections of our triathlon, that was probably the most scenic and the most gorgeous and the best part of the trip.
In the limited amount of boating that I've been able to do, I've noticed that animals, as a rule, they don't recognize you as human or as a threat when you drift up to them in a boat. Whereas if you're on a bike or even walking, they identify you as, oh, there's a human, and we don't know about these things, right? But in a boat, it seems like you can get really close.
That's true. Yeah, you got to be cautious with that. Sometimes animals get a little too close for comfort. We get chased by sea lions, and they're big animals. They can weigh 400 pounds or so, and it would only take a second for them to jump on the deck of our boat and flip us. And when we started, the water temperature was about 35 degrees Fahrenheit, so definitely don't want to flip the boat in those conditions.
Right. So did you have any encounters with wildlife that left you a little bit shaken?
Absolutely. I'd say more amazed than shaken. I mean, we've seen bears up close. When you land on the beach, that's very narrow because there's rainforest on the other side and water on the other, and you see bear tracks, massive bear tracks on the beach, or wolf tracks. And the only place where you can camp is right in the middle of those tracks. You feel nervous at night. You got to make sure that you keep all your food far away from where you're going to pitch your tent and far away from where you're going to eat.
So did you use a bear line or a canister, or what did you do?
Yes, we had 2 bear canister for our food that prevents them from accessing it. We also were hanging a lot of it as well because we had to carry about 3 weeks of food supplies. Problem with Alaska is the settlements or the towns are really far apart, and it's impossible to predict how long it's going to take to go from one place to another because you're so dependent on the weather and the ocean conditions. So, when you have to go 200 miles between towns, it could take us as little as 8 days. It could also take a month. You never know. It really depends on current, wind, wave, and so on.
Mm. Did you supplement your food at all with fish or natural foods that you found along the way?
We thought a little bit about it, catching fish. We realized it was taking way too long to try to fish. So time that we could spend paddling forward, getting in the right direction versus, trying to survive. So no, we did not fish. However, we were eating other things like some seashells we tried, sea urchins, for example. We also ate a lot of the berries. There's a lot of types of berries that grow in those wet environments.
Sure.
We were also eating some plant that looked very much like an asparagus. That's called fiddleheads. And they're small growth of, I would say maybe fern. And when they're baby, they taste very much like asparagus when you cook them.
Yeah, that's great. Asparagus is a type of fern, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Very, very cool. Well, what was the water like, the ocean conditions? If you had those exposed sections where you were open to the Pacific, you would have to really tolerate some huge waves and rollers coming in, I would think.
Right. We learned the hard way that, we lived in Los Angeles before that trip, but we learned the hard way that the Alaskan weather is not the California weather. And things that start in a mirror-like conditions, sometimes the ocean is so flat, there's not a single ripple on it. It looks like a mirror. You can start like this and end up in waves that are 6 foot high and that are rolling and crashing on your boat. So the worst passage we've had to do, we were in seas that were about 9 feet high. So when you're in the bottom, you don't see the horizon, you don't see the land. You feel like you're among the giants, and your boat goes up and down 9 feet as you're crossing that section. It's very intimidating. I think that the day we did the big crossing, we were in our boat for 12 hours nonstop without putting a foot on the ground.
Wow. Did you have to wait for weather in some of these crossings?
A couple times, yeah. We actually only were stranded, I would say, because of weather 2 days. Where we stay put for 2 days waiting for conditions to improve. We dared it a few times. I think our shortest day was 4 miles, and that wasn't by choice. That was dictated by the weather. We left a creek that was fairly sheltered, paddled out in the open, realized that's way too much for us, and pulled out in the next creek and waited it off.
Yeah, that's probably wise, but if you're willing to contend with 12 hours of 9-foot rollers, then I don't think a small storm would keep you at bay too easily.
Right, you get more confident, and sometime, unfortunately, you gotta get a lesson from Mother Nature to teach you that you gotta be more cautious.
Well, did you guys capsize and have issues with that from time to time?
We had some really close calls, but we did not capsize. No, we thanks to our boat that's very stable, and we also wear those dry suits.
Right.
So the dry suit keep you completely dry from neck to toes. The only thing that would get wet if we were to capsize would be our head and our hands. So we would have a decent amount of survival time if we were to capsize. Still not the best scenario.
Wow. So how much do you think the boat and all of the gear that you were hauling weighed?
So the boat itself empty is about 100 pounds. And we had a good 200 pounds of supplies. So if you had food, water, all our camping gears and survival gears, and I'd say about 250 or so, 300 pounds when it's completely full.
That's quite a bit of mass to paddle
right.
along.
Yeah, you get inertia, though. That's the nice thing. When it's really heavy, it might take a long time for you to make it move, but you have momentum after that. So it doesn't take too much work to keep it going.
Well, it's fascinating to me. Sea kayaking is not something that I can say I've done any of. Right. I did whitewater kayaking, I've done rafting, I've done canoeing, but sea kayaking is kind of a whole novel concept to me. So this is really fun to hear about how it went. Did you enjoy the kayaking or the hiking or the biking the most?
It depends when you ask the question. If you ask me right after, we're done with the kayaking portion, I would tell you at the time, I'm never doing this again. Because you're moving, you average about 2 miles per hour or so. And when you're close to shore, you kind of see the landscape moving slowly. But as soon as you move away from shore, you're, let's say, a mile or two away, it feels like you're not going anywhere. And at times we were not going anywhere because of currents. So it's really hard to realize that you're inside a current unless you use a GPS to monitor your speed. But there's one time where we were paddling for an hour and the scenery didn't seem to change much. So I pulled out a GPS and we were literally moving at zero relative to the ground because we had a head current that were pushing us backward.
Well, I was getting ready to ask about the current, so I'm really glad that you brought that up. So in the island areas, the coastal islands on any shore, right, as the tides come in and out, the currents change and reverse, and from one end of the island to another, they're going to come from a different direction depending on the time of day, twice a day. I mean, there's a lot going on there. Did you have to plan for all of that to make it efficient?
This is the majority of our day. I mean, you get charts or tables that tell you at what time is the high tide and at what time is the low tide for known towns. But if you're in between, let's say 50 or 100 miles from a town that has all the numbers on the paper, you have to interpolate. Am I going to get the high tide, a few minutes later, a few minutes earlier, and so on. So tides can fluctuate by about 20 feet from high to low. So it takes 6 hours from the water level to change 20 feet. It makes it very challenging to land somewhere and depart from somewhere. You're not always choosing when you want to go. Sometimes you have to wait for the water to rise high enough so you can launch your boat in the water. So it's all about the tide. We're just trying to accommodate, the tide schedule, and we have no control, and we have to work with that.
Yeah.
It's also a challenge when you camp. When you see a nice sand beach, it's usually a warning sign, right? You see a nice sand beach, it means it's going to get covered at some point. And during the high tide, the water level actually raises into the vegetation. So it goes in the trees. So I don't know how those trees survive, but it looks like 1 or 2 days a month, those trees are actually under the seawater. And you got to plan that. You got to look at the line of seaweeds from the previous tide. You look at your tables and you know that the next tide is going to be about, 1 foot higher. So you got to make sure that you set up your tent above the water line. And a few times we had to set up our alarm at night and, wake up, open the door, and make sure that we're not going to get too wet.
Did you ever wake up in the sea?
No, we planned it pretty well.
Well, I can see that happening.
Yeah, we woke up drenched a few times. There's a reason why it's a rainforest up there. We had 10 days of continuous rain at one point, and everything was wet. You could never get anything to dry. Sleeping bags were wet. The tent was soaked like a sponge. It was just nonstop, and 10 days of that is intense.
Yeah, I can see why you would say at the end of it, I don't want to do that again. But now that time has gone by, how do you feel about it?
Now that it's all over, and when I look back into it, this was the most amazing, the most scenic, the most adventurous part of our entire trip. We call that, a lot of people call that type 2 fun.
Right.
Type 1 is you're doing it and you're having fun doing it. Type 2 is you're not necessarily enjoying it at the moment, but you get great memories of it. Right. So that's a type 2.
Definitely a type 2. And I totally get that. And sometimes when I'm in a type 2 experience, I have to remind myself how much fun this is going to be in a week or so.
Right. I do a lot of that.
I want to take a second to tell you about the Nomadik. It's a subscription box curated for outdoor enthusiasts by outdoor enthusiasts. So each month you get a hand-picked selection of the latest and greatest outdoor gear that's been trip tested and approved by the Nomadik product team, which is made up of guides, athletes, and bona fide adventurers. They partner with brands like Mountainsmith, Gearaid, Sea-Line, Mizu, Empowered, RX Bar, and a lot more. This month's theme is Relax to the Max. So one item inside is an exclusive hammock by Lawson Hammocks, an award-winning hammock maker who's been voted #1 by Backpacker and Outside Magazine. So order by May 14th to get this box. So get quality gear by brands you trust delivered right to your doorstep monthly. Learn more at thenomadik.com/ASP. This episode is also sponsored by CS Instant Coffee, 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee and use adventure at checkout for 20% off.
Any tips or tricks, words to the wise for people that might want to do some sea kayaking in the Inside Passage?
Yeah, there's some protected coves where you can probably start the activities. I mean, I would, of course, recommend you start practicing on a boat in warm water just to get the feel of capsizing and getting back on the boat. It's kind of critical, right? If you're far from shore, you're not going to swim to shore. You got to find out how to get back on board. So practice. And then when we did our first Alaskan trip, we went to an area called Prince William Sound, which is near Anchorage, Alaska. And it was just gorgeous, and the waters are mostly protected. You never get into really big seas because the body of water is fairly small, and you're approaching glaciers, icebergs. It's just gorgeous. Yeah, if you've never done it, definitely start slow and pick up as you go.
Okay, well, it's on my list. I have to do that one. Sounds wonderful. Wonderful. I did make it to Prince William Sound and got to see the glaciers and everything that you're describing, and we were on a bigger ship. It would be so fun to be in a sea kayak where you can really get close to the action, you know?
Can be scary at times.
Oh, yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I also had an experience once, Yannick, where I was being swept out to sea from the Florida Keys because of extraordinarily strong currents that were created by the tide coming in. And I thought that, I was going to spend the next month adrift until I starved or something ate me. And so I can imagine how spooky that would be. Was it scary or was it peaceful? Were you and Shirley able to relax into it after a while, or was there always that little bit of intimidation there?
It's interesting because we planned that trip, and of course there's a lot of anxiety, fear of the unknown, right? That's what adventure is. It's when things don't happen the way you want them to happen. That's really where adventure starts. But we spent a lot of time planning that first leg of our trip, that kayaking trip, probably 2 months of research and testing and practicing and dialing everything in. And then the two other legs of our trip, hiking the Pacific Crest Trail and cycling to the southern tip of South America, we pretty much winged those two activities because you get in the rhythm. You get into, the mode of traveling and you sort of know that things are going to sort themselves out over time, you just got to make progress. And sometimes even if you go in the wrong direction, you can't really call that getting lost. You just made, a little detour.
Right.
You're eventually going to get to your destination. If time is not of essence, you'll get there.
Yeah, that's
we had
true.
a lot of safety. Yeah, I want to mention one thing. We had planned a lot of things for safety. So we had a VHF radio to communicate with other boats. We had flares in case we're crashed our boat, for example, and are unable to resume the navigation. We had two-way radios. We had a spot device. I don't know if you know what this is. This is that little orange box that you can send a signal to the satellite and tell them that you're in trouble, and they will send hopefully rescue personnel to get you. So we had a lot of safety devices, and we also had pepper spray, bear spray for an occasional bad encounter, and we were prepared as much as we could.
In the end, did you find yourself needing to use those devices, or was it just nice to know that they were there?
It's peace of mind. We never had to use them.
Yeah.
We were using our radio to get the weather forecast, before we paddle out. But we never had to use our bear spray. But we heard a lot of stories. It's interesting how everybody you meet along the Inside Passage has some sort of a bear story. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good, but a lot of bear stories. We actually, when we kayaked ourselves, we did not see grizzlies along the Inside Passage. It was a little early in the season. They were not getting to the coast yet. But we did see a commodity bear. It's a bear that's completely white. And our first thought when we saw that bear on shore was, that it was a polar bear. And then I tried to think a little bit and realized there's no polar bear that low, along the coast. So that must have been something else. And doing more research, we stopped at a ghost town, talked to the caretaker of that ghost town, and he said, oh yeah, those are Commodity bear. They're not albino, but they look very much like an albino, and they're really rare. He was mentioning another person who had been coming for the past 5 years looking to take photo of these bears and could never find one.
Wow.
Very elusive animal, and we were lucky enough to spot one.
Well, I've heard stories that the Native Americans would see a bear like that and see that as an omen for times that are changing or things to come.
Right. We felt incredibly lucky and privileged, really, to witness that rare animal that very few people get to see.
I think whenever I have an experience somewhat like that, and I've never seen a commodity bear, but I always look at that and I like to just kind of chuckle to myself and say, this is a good medicine day. Good things have happened, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's really fun. Well, we have to transition into some more of the trip. I really wanted to hear a lot about the Inside Passage because it's what I know the least about, right? But the Pacific Crest Trail, how did that go for you?
We wanted to vary the activity. We're the type of people who tend to get bored if we repeat the same thing too much. So the kayaking, after 2.5 months of doing it every day, we were glad it ended. And we were excited for the next leg. Now, the main challenge, as you can imagine, when you kayak, you use your upper body a lot.
Right.
A lot of arms, a lot of back muscle. Your legs are sitting on a chair the whole time. So that transition was interesting because we had really strong upper bodies at the time, but our legs were jello. We could barely walk. I think in 2.5 months, we had walked a couple miles or so. So we used trekking poles at the beginning and powered up, pushing with our arms, and over time, of course, your legs get stronger and you're able to do what you're supposed to do. But like all those activities, it's really hard to judge how much food you need to carry with you between, resupply points, because you don't know, over the long term, how many miles you'll be able to cover on a repetitive basis. So is it 15 miles a day? 20 miles a day, 25, 30, we kind of have an idea, but we never experience, the day after day after day type workouts. So,
sure.
So we started and, got stronger over time. We actually crossed the state of Washington, pretty much under snow. It was completely covered with snow when we, started it. A lot of other parties had bailed or had trouble with avalanches and frostbites. I'd say our background made us feel strong because we did a lot of mountaineering prior to starting that triathlon. So we were used to snow and ice, and we felt confident that we could navigate through that. GPS was key because most of the trail was buried under several feet of snow at the time.
So I hadn't really thought about that, to spend such a long period of time seated in the sea kayak. So maybe it would be a good idea for people to maybe jog a mile or something each day before they get in the boat.
But we were not pressed by time, so we actually had planned a very conservative schedule. Our goal when we started the Pacific Crest Trail was to cover about 15 miles per day. And so we started with 15 miles a day, and that's the amount of food we carried, until we get to our next resupply points. And we slowly increased that, and we dialed things in over time. And we realized that the sweet spots for us was around 25 miles per day.
25 miles of hiking.
Correct, yes. Now, when your backpack is full of food, you have a week of supplies with you, you move a little slow. But as you start consuming all that food, the pack gets lighter and you go a little faster. So that was our sweet spot. The other difficult thing to estimate is the amount of elevation gain and loss. It's one thing to do 25 miles on fairly flat ground, add 4,000 or 5,000 feet of climbing, descending, and it becomes a little more challenging.
A lot more, I would say. So that's an impressive distance to cover every day. I think that through hikers end up somewhere around that distance because as they get accustomed to the rhythm of hiking and their muscles and everything, adjust to it, then that tends to be the distances I hear people talking about. That still sounds like a very long way to go day after day after day after day. I mean, that's about like doing a marathon.
Pretty much, yes. A marathon a day. And we figured out, the trail, total distance for the Pacific Crest Trail is just under 2,700 miles. So we figured if we break that into 100 segments, we'll be doing 1% of the distance on each day. And we thought, this we can process with our head because there's so much distance and so much elevation gain. It's hard to fathom, how you can handle it. So breaking it into a full percentage sounded like we could handle that in our head. The other thing also, which is amazing, that Pacific Crest Trail has about 500,000 feet of climbing. Imagine climbing up 500,000 feet. It's
wow.
About Everest is 30,000 feet, more or less from sea level. So it's kind of like climbing Everest from sea level about, I'd say about 18 times.
Well, tell us one of your favorite experiences that you had on the trail.
Yes, of course. The favorite thing is when you get to eat. It's amazing. We take that for granted, having food in our plate every day in the Western world. But we were hungry. We felt like we were starving. We were losing body mass rapidly. And that had to do with the mileage we were trying to put every day. We were sort of on a schedule. We had a deadline because when you go southbound on the Pacific Crest Trail, you have to make sure you cross the southern part, the Sierra Nevada, before the start of the snow season, which is typically early October. And there's some really high passes you had to get over, some passes that are at 13,000 feet. And if it was covered with a foot of snow, that would make that section very challenging and very difficult. So we had a schedule to maintain. We were pushing hard to maintain it, and we were constantly hungry. We could never have enough food. We did a lot of gorging on food when we stopped in the town, but then we had to ration ourselves for the next segment. So that was the challenging part, and food was the thing that was in our mind constantly. Where can we eat?
I have heard many people say that the scenery on the Pacific Crest Trail is just outstanding and that they really, really enjoyed just hiking through all of that paradise. But since you just came from the Inside Passage, which is really outstanding, how would you rate it?
It is gorgeous. There's some repetition to it as well. There's always the dream of what we think it's going to be like, and then there's the reality of what it's like. And I don't want to put a negative spin on this, but there's a lot of repetition when you hike.
Sure.
Especially for my part, what we thought was difficult was crossing the state of Oregon, because in Oregon you spend a lot of your time in the trees, in the forest. So you don't get the great views very often. But those are the highlights. When you pop above the trees and you get to see a magnificent sceneries, you see Crater Lake, you see the Three Sisters area. Those are gorgeous. But in between the gorgeous spots, there's a lot of repetition and a lot of sceneries that doesn't seem to change fast enough.
Right. So how did the views change and the scenery change as you went north to south? I know that you start out with a lot of the temperate rainforest, and then you continue down into drier areas as you go south, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you get to see it, as it happens very slowly, and that's probably the best way to experience it. Oftentimes when we go on vacation, we fly somewhere or we drive a long distance to get to our destination, and we see a drastic change in scenery. But hiking the trail at the speed we're hiking, you see the gradual change. It's not like, opening the door of the plane and seeing something brand new. It changes gradually, slowly, and it's really from your pictures that you can tell that the scenery is now different than it was a week ago. Because in your mind, you just see the climate changing, temperature increasing, vegetation slowly transitioning, but it's never very dramatic for most of it.
When I was a kid, I was a little bit prejudiced. And what I mean by that is I was prejudiced for the type of scenery that I liked. I thought that the plains were boring and the mountains were exciting, that the forest was interesting and the desert was dry, right? And I think over the years I've realized that every landscape has its own unique beauty and charm and adventure. But what would you say was your favorite?
So this is interesting what you're saying, because we talked to other thru hikers of the Pacific Crest Trail that were going the opposite direction. It seems like everybody's sort of prejudiced at some point. A lot of them like the green. They like the forest because they started their trip in the desert. As for us, I'd say my favorite part is the Sierra Nevada of California. I love the higher altitude, the expansive views. The northern part of the country, Oregon, Washington State, those have a lot of trees and they block your views oftentimes. So personally, Sierra Nevadas of California were my favorite.
Just because the views were more expansive, huh?
Right. And the lakes are gorgeous. There's water everywhere, so you can resupply. You don't have to carry a ton of liquid with you. As you go south, though, you start crossing deserts. You have to watch for your water. You have to carry a lot of it because you don't know where and when you're going to find the next source. And, and there's a lot of repetition. Crossing a flat desert, it takes a long time for you to get from point A to point B.
Oh, yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So you did phase 2, the thru hike of the Pacific Crest Trail, in 123 days. So you guys were pretty darn close to that 1% a day. You were
right.
hoofing
So the where we lose, days is really when you stop at those trail angels.
Oh, yeah.
There's some people that are wonderful along the trail. They basically open up their house to hikers. They allow them to do a laundry, to shower, to camp on their land, even sometimes to stay in their house. And those are amazing people. And they get to see hundreds of hikers who invade their privacy, I should say. But those are awesome time. You get to rest, you get to chat, you don't have to walk. Because walking becomes like a job almost after a while, right? Your body's telling you to stop, but you press on. So you're tired. All you want to do is rest and watch TV probably, or
right.
eat. But you're on a schedule, so you can't rest too long. It's easy to, and it's natural probably to want to take a break. But if you take too many breaks, you might miss the window.
Oh, yeah. I think that is why a lot of people choose to section hike these major trails so that they don't have to race against the changing seasons so much.
Going northbound, is the most traditional ways of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. I'd say the ratio of northbound versus southbound hikers is 90-10 or 95-5% in that range, because you have much more time going north. You can start, in early April. And by the time you get to the mountain, the snow starts to melt, and you get yourself about 5 months to complete the trail before you get shut down by the winter season. When you go southbound, your window is a lot shorter. You get yourself, more like 4 months to complete it. So there's definitely more of a rush feeling going south, and it's not as social, and it's not as stress-free as the other direction.
So when you meet people along the trail, do they look at you sideways and say, "Why are you walking the wrong way?"
Pretty much, yes. And we get to talk a lot when all the northbound people are, when we're crossing path, everybody wants to talk and know what's coming.
Right.
And, if we spend 5 minutes with each individual and there's 300 of them, that's a lot of days here. That's a lot of, distance that can be hiked. So yeah, you got to balance it out, how much time you want to socialize versus how much time you want to walk.
That's
it's
not
great to
one
socialize,
I would have thought of. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's great.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. The Nomadik, the first outdoor subscription box that helps you go on more adventures with the latest gear by delivering themed monthly boxes with innovative products and an outdoor challenge to match. Learn more at thenomadik.com/ASP. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.